As you watch this, it's been a couple of days since the U.S. military raid that killed ISIS leader, the purported leader of the caliphate that was going to establish this eternal country for the Islamic fundamentalists. ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has been killed, or rather killed himself when he was backed up against the wall by U.S. forces. And this is Bill Whittle now. I'm Scott Ott. And Bill, I just wanted to get your reaction, first of all, when you heard of the death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. It for some people conjured the reaction that people had when Osama bin Laden was killed. But if I remember correctly, Bill, at that time, bin Laden was kind of a marginal character by the time we got around to killing him, not to diminish that at all. But Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was, as far as we could see, still active in fomenting this idea of a caliphate, still hoping to recapture the Syria that Donald Trump and American forces had stripped from him. So what was your reaction, first of all, when you heard the news?
Well, my first reaction, needless to say, was I was glad to hear it. And my immediate follow-up reaction was that I was very, very glad to hear it, because one of the things we talked about just last week, I guess, when we were talking about Donald Trump and the deal with Turkey and removing forces and so on. And I, as I recall, I said, getting the ground forces out of there is one thing. And when I say ground forces, I mean, regular Army troops. I think our special forces guys go anywhere they want to. But I did say then that the important thing was to maintain if you're not going to do a nation building or counterinsurgency, then you've got to be prepared to do counter-terror. And for that to happen as quickly on the heels of that decision, which I was unsure about, was certainly reassuring news to me and good news as well.
Well, that's an interesting point that you bring up there, Bill, because as you know, with operations like this, the planning didn't happen overnight. This was months, perhaps a year or more, of planning to not only to track down the location of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, but also to be able to plan how they would approach this. Reportedly, there was the Kurds, the Syrian Democratic Forces, had a man on the inside, so to speak, of the Baghdadi compound, who was able not only to provide a map of the facility where he was and the stationing of various guards, but also over the course of time was able to acquire some DNA samples, including a pair of used underwear and a blood sample that made it possible for quick identification of the body. Now, all of that was already in play when Donald Trump announced that he was pulling the troops out of Syria. Do you think that Trump may come to reevaluate his kind of dismissive comments about the value of the Kurds in the battle against ISIS in light of their help in this process?
Well, there's a lot to unpack here. I just wanted to go back to one thing you mentioned in the first question, and that was the mood when bin Laden was hit versus the mood for al-Baghdadi. And as you pointed out, bin Laden by that point was essentially a figurehead leader. He wasn't really in operational control. So on some level, getting al-Baghdadi was a bigger get. But in all honesty, I mean, bin Laden hurt us so badly that there's no small wonder that that's where the emotional attachment was. The work of Baghdadi is something that you have to go looking for if you really got the stomach to see some of those ISIS execution videos. But in any event, in both cases, couldn't happen to nicer guys. So as far as the rest of it goes, I think, as I said, that it's excellent news that this kind of activity continues, regardless of our actual boots on the ground strength. And I will be my concerns about abandoning our on-battlefield allies, as many people have pointed out, some of them are not our allies, and some of them are, and some of them aren't, and so on. But certainly, without question, at the very least, there are individuals who have worked with our soldiers, and I know a few guys who've been there and back, and they have high regard for those people. So I think really for my moral comfort on this one, the only thing I'm actually concerned about on this one is what happens, or happened, but what happens hopefully to the guy who was on the inside, because I think he should be given a house in Pacific Palisades. Why
would you punish him by making him live in California?
Well, he's undoubtedly got blood on his hands too. What happens to this guy? One of the things that got me so that that hit me so hard morally about this idea of abandoning the Kurds is not so much the position of the Kurds, and it's not even so much the Kurds as a people, although they've been through an awful lot of hell over the course of their existence. What's always stuck in my craw about this was the abandonment of allies, of people who fought on your side. And we have a history of doing that. We did it in Vietnam, where a number of those mountain tribes they basically, showed us how to work in some of these areas. And then we just left them out there to dry. So I find that kind of thing really reprehensible. I'm hoping that that whoever was on the inside is now on the outside, and this person deserves U.S. citizenship for two reasons. First of all, he certainly risked his life, and in a particularly gruesome way. If he'd been discovered as a spy, they not only would have killed him, they would have killed him in a pretty nasty way. But when you think about, does this guy deserve this kind of reward? I think he does. I've seen the inside of the Brussels nightclubs, and I've seen what happened in Paris. I've seen the aftermath photos of all of these things. I saw the Jordanian pilot in a metal cage being set on fire and burning to death. I saw people with det cord around their necks having their heads blown off simultaneously. All of this stuff is the work of al-Baghdadi, and whoever that individual or individuals were who got us the inside information that made this raid successful, that person needs to be rewarded with security. And when I say rewarded with security, I mean he, his family, and everybody else that he knows should be gotten out of there and allowed to live in pretty much paradise on earth, which would be virtually any state in the Union.
Now, Bill, I have been watching some coverage on the mainstream media, and particularly I intentionally watch things like MSNBC because I want to get a finger on the pulse of what the other side, so to speak, is thinking. And I have been struck by the positive coverage of the accomplishment of the U.S. military, and even muted, but praise for President Trump in ordering this attack. But it seems to me, Bill, that President Trump can be his own worst enemy in these situations. He's sort of the king of the unforced error in the sense that, and not to mix my sports metaphors too much, but there's an old story about a kid that scores a touchdown, and when he gets into the end zone of the football field, he starts doing a dance and spiking the ball and doing all that kind of stuff. And the referee comes over to get the ball, and he says, "Son, why don't you act like you've been here before and you plan to come back?" And there's a sense in which President Trump, while trumpeting his own accomplishments in this regard, kind of backhanded the Kurds for their accomplishment. He says, this is how he described the Kurdish contribution to the effort. "They gave us some information that turned out to be helpful." That was it. He also made a somewhat backhanded remark about U.S. intelligence in the past, having kind of slammed intelligence for being too eager to go after the whole election meddling Russia Mueller report kind of thing. And it just seems like he's not capable of standing up in public and doing what most presidents would have done, which is first paying tribute to the U.S. troops, then paying tribute to our allies, and then paying tribute to the intelligence that led to this and to the American people who had the backbone to stick with this long fight. And instead, he talks about what a super duper job he did.
Well, there's a few things to unpack there first. He obviously has a low opinion of the Kurds, and his opinion of the Kurds must be obviously connected to what he perceives the Kurds' position to the United States is. As far as his mistrust of the intelligence community, he gets a pass on that one from me. The intelligence community, high levels of the intelligence community, FBI and CIA, have been in the process of a 3-year coup against him and the people that voted for him. So if he's a little prickly about the intelligence community, like I say, he gets a pass on that one.
Well, Bill, but he fails to name names when he does stuff like that. He damns tens of thousands of employees of our Central Intelligence Agency, for example, or the FBI, because he didn't like the way Jim Comey handled things, or he doesn't like the way John Brennan talks, or things like that.
I'm gonna go out on a limb on this one here. and say that that I think if the mega story, the meta story is true, if James Comey and Brennan and all the rest of them decided that it was in the best interest of the United States for Hillary Clinton to win the election, regardless of what the American people say, that's not something they could have done completely on their own. There must have been other people in the agencies that were helping them do this or were aware of them doing it. And those people who knew about it and didn't come forward deserve a little shame. But you're right. Most of the people in the agencies, I have friends, mid to high level friends in the FBI. And when James Comey came out and read the Hillary indictment and then said, we don't recommend prosecution, they just threw their glasses against the wall. They were absolutely furious. So yes, you don't want to badmouth those people. And look, it is President Trumpet, right? I mean, that's what it is. That's who we've got. Trump's combativeness, his and his ego are the only things that are keeping us in this fight. I don't want to sound like I'm backpedaling, because I'm not backpedaling. What I'm doing, at least is what it seems like I'm doing, is I am just weighing the cost of this man. I think the announcement could have been done with a great deal more dignity, and it could have been done with a great deal more credit to the people involved. But Donald Trump has been, raked over the coals for so long now. I imagine he's a little defensive. I know I am. When I say this is what the guy costs, it seems to me impossible to separate the willingness to fight. Number one, anybody who is perceived to be trying to get you, or an opponent of yours, that I think comes from a real estate market in New York City and a long time at it. But the ego thing often is distasteful to me in some areas, especially when regarding credit to the military. But this is what he costs. And if he didn't have that ego, he wouldn't be able to fight any of this battle. If he didn't have the ego that he has, he would not be willing to do the things that he is doing, which get him called racist, homophobic, all of it, and endure a 3-year rolling coup d'etat from the intelligence agencies and so on. So when I say this is what he costs, it's not me saying, yeah, you know what, come to think of it, I'm glad he took the credit and didn't give any to the military. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is the elements that sometimes make Donald Trump unsavory, at least in terms on some levels, are essential to his character. And if he didn't have those elements, then we would be out of a republic by now.
Let's just focus or end this on the positive, and that is, but by all accounts, this operation was flawless. It worked exactly as designed, at least from the public revelation of what we've seen so far. Our military performed superbly, even making plans for things like, well, if the door is booby-trapped, let's not go through the door, let's blow a hole in the wall, which is what they did, bringing along a very small DNA analysis tool, about 100 pounds the size of a photocopier, with them so that they could do immediate DNA analysis. They already had the DNA thanks to our Kurdish asset that was within that compound. And I'm not saying that the guy in the compound was a Kurd, but the Kurds had arranged for this guy to be in there. And even having biometric facial recognition software so that they were able to positively identify the disembodied head after al-Baghdadi blew himself apart, but apparently there was enough to secure that. It really is a marvel of U.S. intelligence, military force. And one thing must be noted about President Trump. He's being criticized for not saying anything to the Democrats before this raid happened. But to his credit, the commander-in-chief managed to keep this completely hushed up until it had occurred.
You betcha, buddy, because if he says something to the Democrats, then they might as well just announce it directly to al-Baghdadi, because there are so many Democrats, so many progressives have such an intense hatred of Trump that it doesn't matter what he does. whatever he does is bad. We saw this in the New York Times. The New York Times, with al-Baghdadi, was a quiet scholar, a gentleman.
Actually, the Washington Post called him an austere religious scholar.
Yes, I'm sorry. It wasn't the Times. It was the Washington Post. An austere religious scholar, just a man of ideas and letters who's forced into a world of fighting for his own freedom as a result of the American invasion of Iraq and so on. So if Donald Trump orders the killing of one of the worst people in the world, and we pull it off, then that has to be turned into, at the very least, something morally ambiguous, if not something morally reprehensible. And so his ability to keep these operations from the Democrats is why they work. I had a thought about this, and this is maybe just a good way to close. We have almost, 18, 19 years now in Afghanistan and the whole situation in Iraq. And we've done learned a lot of lessons and paid a lot in terms of blood and treasure. This is beginning to look like what the future is going to be in terms of defending our country against terrorism. Electronic assets in terms of surveillance. We need to maintain human assets in terms of surveillance. And that I am a little concerned about. But our special forces are simply unbelievable. And I would just like to say this. I know most people who watch this are conservative, but occasionally somebody just falls in by accident. It's one thing to say we want to bring the troops home, and obviously I don't want them in harm's way if they're not protecting the interests or the safety of the American people. But the special forces guys live for this. This is not something that they don't want to do. This is not like, oh my God, we got to go on this mission. I wonder if survive. They live for this. This is what they do. They're the best in the world at it. And a combination of things like drones, Predator drones or Reapers that are able to launch a Hellfire missile on a target in real time, and then the ability to take simply the best war fighters in the history of the world and put them in a very surgical way onto the head of the problem. That's the kind of anti-terror foreign policy that I think is probably likely, and I also think is probably the best option for this country. We cannot ever put down our guard the way we did before. We have to understand these people are after us all the time. And in the modern world, it's not a question of them building a fleet of battleships. They can strike at any time. And we have to be ahead of them every time. And if we don't, then bad things happen. And so the people who do the intelligence decoding, the people who do the connections and the analysis and all that other stuff, they're the unsung heroes. And you're right to point that out. It is not good that NSA and CIA and FBI agents are tarred by the same brush that James Comey and John Brennan have used to smear those agencies. So all of them working together on this operation seems to me to be just perfect. And the final thing I'll say is, if they took this DNA kit with them, and since we now know they have one, that is an indication that if you think it through, it is an indication that when we finally get to confront these guys, excuse the gruesome imagery, but in almost every case, either with a drone strike or with a SEAL team, we are almost certainly going to get fragments of that person. Obviously, he would have been easy to identify if he's just been shot, but they didn't know. I'm sure they knew everything about the explosive vest. I'm sure they knew everything about everything. So if you hit a guy with a bomb, or if you go into a situation with guys on the ground and you know the guy's wearing a suicide vest, literally suicide vest, then all of a sudden a portable DNA kit becomes kind of handy, because there's generally not going to be enough left of those guys to scoop up with a shovel. And I'm sorry to be enjoying this as much as I do, but I do. And I do because I don't forget things like that pilot who was burned alive in the cage, and the people in orange jumpsuits kneeling on the beach while their throats were cut like animals. And I don't forget those things. And those are great acts of evil. I don't forget what the inside of that Belgian nightclub looked like either. And so when I find out that one of the main people responsible for these kind of atrocities is no longer with us, I feel very, very good about it.
Well, there are a group of people who appreciate blunt, truthful discussions like this, and we call them the members at BillWhittle.com. They are the ones who have funded this enterprise. And by the way, this week, the members have made possible for you to not only see these videos as you have been enjoying them, but also to hear the audio versions as podcasts on Google Play Music, on the iTunes or the Apple Podcast app, and whatever your favorite podcast app is. You go to BillWhittle.com, click the podcast link, and you can pick up that link that will allow you to listen to it in your favorite podcast app. If you don't know what a podcast is, just pretend it's radio. It's fairly simple. It is not obscure. And you can then listen on your way to work, while you're exercising, while you're doing workout in the yard, and you can enjoy Right Angle as well as Bill Whittle Now anytime you please. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this possible.